Hello, good morning. Thank you guys for joining us here today. I am going to bring on a very special guest here in just a moment. And we're going to start on a really powerful conversation here this morning about empowering your health and just how the industry has just changed, over after the last couple decades here. So let me bring on my guest. We'll just take here just a minute. All right. Okay. Hold on. We're just bringing on our guest here. Here we go. There she is.
Okay.
Hi. We did it. We got the technology. Yes. Okay. Amazing. Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. And how are you? Can you see me
I can
okay?
see you perfect. All right. There you are. All right, everybody. So for those of you who are tuning in, hello. I see you guys just jumping on. So welcome. So our very special guest today, this is my friend, my dear friend, my Tulum sister. Her name is Angela, and she has been a pharmacist for over 40 years, has owned her own pharmacies, and goes by the Pillless Pharmacist. And so today we are going to basically talk about the approach to medicine, things that we have noticed that have changed over the past 40 years, medicine as a whole, what's working, what hasn't been working, and how we are in this kind of sick care system versus an actual healthcare system. And without further ado, this is the incredible Angela Orr. She's amazing. So we're very excited to have her here today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. And to be honest, this is my first live on Instagram. I've been
Oh,
on
cool.
live on Facebook quite a bit. So if it's just a new experience for me. So I'm thrilled that it's with you to be my first experience on Instagram. And I'm thrilled about this conversation. It's a really great conversation to have, especially in today's world where there's so much going on with medicine, the sick care system, the medical system, and personal responsibility, personal health, and all of that.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So it's a very broad and also a very like nuanced topic. There's so much to consider, in when approaching like your healthcare these days, right?
Yeah.
Because there have been certain things that I think that we've seen that can be extremely helpful in the short term, but like detrimental in the long term. There's a lot of balance, with
Yes.
when it comes to really managing our health. So like I would love to just, see just what are just some of the things that you have noticed that how medicine has really changed over the past 4 decades? Like, what have you seen just across the board where you're like, wow, this is really different?
I would love to. So and in doing so, I'll give the audience just a little history about myself
Yes, please.
and just a little bit about where I've come from and what I've done. So as Cara said, I am a pharmacist. I have been for 40 years. And I know I don't look it. I went to school when I was in grade school. No.
Yes. Like,
And
listen, you're gorgeous. All right.
so and actually I've worked in pharmacy because I worked in a pharmacy 5 years during school. So I've worked in pharmacy and healthcare for 45 years. So it's a long time.
Gosh, yeah.
And for my own personal journey, and what happened to me is I have had, very traditional career in pharmacy. I owned and operated two of my own pharmacies. And for 15 years, during that time, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I knew at that point that something had to change. We all have pivotal points in our life, and most of us have more than one. That one for me was really major because it had me really think about what was going on. There was no history, no gene that could have been made me more susceptible. I had a brother who had cancer, years ago and who passed away, but it was a totally different type. And so I thought stress was literally killing me. I had two pharmacies. I looked like I had everything going for me, a lot of friends, travel, work in the industry, did a lot of legislative things for independent pharmacies, and I was so stressed all the time. Very obese, drank a lot of alcohol, and just did felt disconnected even though I was connected. And I didn't even realize that until I stopped to evaluate. So luckily, the surgeon told me that I was a very boring case. I was an uninteresting case.
Uninteresting.
So that was a good thing to be uninteresting. So I really said, okay, I'm going to go traditional. I didn't have to have the chemotherapy or radical surgery. It was uh, radiation, but very local. But I thought I've got to change something. And I've always been into personal development. So I really started to look at more about how could I have caused this. I don't think I would have put it at that in those terms at the
Sure.
time. But, and I'm saying this only because that's pertinent to today also. What did I do to cause this and what can I do to fix it? Not only now, but going forward. And that's when I started looking at alternatives. And I realized that, Western medicine as we know it is really a sick care system. That
Mm,
we have a lot of wonderful modalities, we have a lot of wonderful advances, and there are advances that we have had that also aren't so great, um, that we think are, but make people sicker. And so I really looked at, you know, how can I take this healthcare system for myself, but really make it more of a well care system. And I've been on that journey ever since. And over the years since then, I've come to a point where, as you said, I'm consider myself the pillless pharmacist because I believe in medication, but I believe in the judicious use of medication.
mm,
And what I see today, the biggest change in healthcare is that, again, it's really gone from a healthcare system, instead of keeping people healthy, to really only addressing issues when they're sick and broken. So to me, it's a sick care system. And unfortunately, because a lot of times the root cause is never addressed, people who are in that system continue to be in that system and don't really get better,
mm,
long term.
mm-hmm.
And we also don't allow our own innate ability to heal or to work with that, our body and our innate ability to heal, to booster that, to let that really take care of things. So, for instance, when I was a kid, and even early in my career as a pharmacist, people would go to the doctor for, say, a cold and cough. And they might have some kind of bacterial infection, so they might get an antibiotic. But a lot of times it was just supportive, measures. And now I see people go to the doctor and they might get one, maybe two prescriptions at the most. And now I see people go to the doctor for a cold, bronchitis, maybe, whatever, and they get 7 prescriptions because
Wow.
they get an antibiotic. Then they have to get an antifungal because the antibiotic could lead to a fungus infection or yeast infection.
Okay.
They maybe get a steroid to help with that inflammation, maybe an inhaler, something to help with the cough, and, then a nasal inhaler, besides an inhaler like for your lungs. So I mean, that's crazy.
It's yeah, I mean, and what's funny about those situations too is that I think that people really they want to feel like they're doing something about having an illness, right? So there's
Yeah,
when we go to the doctor like I want an antibiotic to knock this thing out, but a lot of like colds are viral in nature. So like the
right.
antibiotic it's really not going to do anything except just I mean, it just needs to run its course. But then now you're taking, antibiotics which can disrupt the microbiome in a huge way. You have like something to help and then 8 other things to help what the other thing hurts. And I think that's where
Yeah,
people get just lost in that cycle of just like just caught in that cycle of putting like of band-aiding different things to try to hold
yes,
everything together instead of like you said really just trusting like that like we like back in the 90s like I don't remember that growing up like we didn't have that you would just get a cold and you'd be kind of sniffly and miserable for for
yeah,
for like
yeah.
5 to 7 business days and then that was it.
And then that was it, you
Yeah,
know. And,
yeah.
and so I just say, and like you said, that all of those other things can happen to your body, the microbiome, the yeast, and then this and that and whatever, but your body just never really is allowed to really kind of heal itself or to run, because running the course to me also means allowing the body to do its natural function.
Yeah. Yeah. There's power in that. Like we, for example, like I think of like medications that reduce fevers, right? Like a fever is innately, it's your body's infinite intelligence activating to help basically heat up so quickly that certain pathogens can't live in your body anymore because it's literally too hot. And so we
Yes,
think,
and actually, there's a lot of debate about, especially with children and fevers,
oh, really?
about when do you allow the fever to just be,
Hmm.
and then when do you treat it?
That's,
Because
yeah, that's very important.
a lot of the symptoms that we have, such as, like you said, a fever, and it's a sign from your body that it's working on something.
Hmm.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it can be a sign of the body trying to self-correct, go back into that homeostasis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, yeah, it's, I think that that's where, the body's like infinite intelligence, just like you said, it just comes online in a really powerful way,
Yes.
and in a really big way. And so, you know, I, in terms of, we've talked about, like just like the kind of, the overuse of certain medications and things like that. What I'm curious, what have you seen in terms of like people's mental health when it comes to medication? I know we were talking a little bit about, the physical body, and then what have you noticed with mental health and medication too?
So, this is a topic that is really very touchy, especially in today's world. I think since 2020,
Mm,
big C year,
yeah.
uh, so much has happened, and specifically related to, our mental health.
Hmm.
And again, I feel like we treat a lot of symptoms, or we treat a lot of things that people are experiencing, but we don't get back down to the root cause.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's such an, oh, so again, I believe in the judicious use of medication. I would never tell a patient to just go off of medication.
Sure.
However, let's take the antidepressants,
Oh,
the Prozacs, the fluoxetine, which is fluoxetine, the paroxetines, the Wellbutrin or bupropion, a lot of those class of drugs,
hmm.
especially in children or young adults.
Hmm.
Those medications affect their brain, obviously, because that's what it
Yeah.
does. And there are a lot of studies out that show that with some specific drugs and some specific diagnosis like depression, it's a placebo effect.
Interesting.
Not 100%, I'm not saying 100%, but over 50% of the time that, you know, somebody could potentially believe in the pill, or not even the pill, but the taking of the pill more than they believe that they can do something to help themselves, with their mental health. And, most antidepressants, they say it takes 6 to 8 weeks to really kick in fully, but that's about the amount of time that it takes to really also reprogram your brain for you to think,
Mm,
oh, this is going to help and this is going to make a difference. Now,
interesting.
there could be some true neurochemical imbalances. So I'm not saying that there's not. The majority of people, a doctor will prescribe a medication, especially in mental health, and then still not address the root cause. Does the patient go to counseling? Have they been referred to maybe some classes on self-regulation? Have they been referred to, like, some of the um, tools that I like to use: meditation, journaling,
Okay.
EFT tapping,
Yeah.
even things like yoga or movement, Tai Chi, these different types of things. Yoga, these have all been scientifically proven to help you improve the function of your brain. I also am a heart math certified practitioner, so I use a lot of heart math. Again, these are all science-based methods. So that's what I like to say, woo-woo works because it's science-based. And I
Yes.
would
Yeah.
rather see, like especially the young adults, can we refer them to something before we give them medication?
Hmm. Yeah.
And so that's where I feel like I don't want to say failure, but that's a piece of to me, that missing link of why it doesn't work. Because if you look at how many people really feel like an antidepressant works for them, a lot of times you have to add another medicine, which again, with the mental health, especially type of medications, there's a high propensity of really significant side effects.
Yeah.
And um, with that, if we have to give another medication
Yeah.
for those side effects. So and in the US, we spend as much, if not more, on drug-drug interactions or drug side effects than we do on drugs.
Wow. So it's not even like at that point, it's not even about it's not about the main concern anymore. It's just about damage control. It kind of sounds like
Absolutely.
from what you're saying.
That's a good way of putting it. I haven't put it that way before, but that's a really great way of putting it. Yes.
Yeah. And I very, that the antidepressant, like these concerns, especially with like, putting children on antidepressants and how it impacts development is an issue very close to my heart. I had been placed on antidepressants when I was 14 years old. That was when, it was like early 2000s. Everybody was on Prozac. It was like this new, hip,
Yeah.
like very popular, trendy
Yep.
kind of thing. So
Yep.
I had been on, Zoloft, but it's true that like the medications can be very interesting because if you don't have that supportive therapy that's there, you can get caught in this cycle where it's like, even if you're still having trauma responses and even if you're feeling angry or things, you still kind of feel really good because you got the medication in your system. So it creates like you,
Exactly. Exactly. And when you were prescribed that, do you remember, were you offered or did anybody talk about additional types of things that could help?
Um, they they introduced the idea of diet change in therapy. So they at first, but it was done. I remember it being done in a very sort of like resigned sort of way. They're like,
Mm,
well, you could change your diet,
mm,
you could do some therapy. And I
mm.
was kind of like, and there I was, a child who was not super into self-development at that point, like
Right.
so
Right.
I was just like, yeah, I don't feel good. Give me the thing that's going to make me feel good. So
Yep.
it wasn't
Yep.
really presented as much of like a very appealing or enticing thing to even consider. So I was like, absolutely, give me the happy pill. And I was like,
Yeah.
please and thank you.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
was like, great, I feel
Yep.
amazing. So
And,
that was, the
and,
experience.
and
Yeah.
so, and again, it's you're giving these medications, especially when you talk about like not only the antidepressants, which is a huge issue, I think, but even like the ADHD type medicines, which are addictive.
Mhm.
People become very reliant on them, but you're giving it to 4, 5, 6 year olds. And they've got a developing brain.
Yeah.
And, I don't think we always take into consideration, like, is it just normal childhood behavior? Or, like, how come the amount of ADHD has increased so tremendously? And I think often it's a way to, um, I don't want to say control because I'm not a conspiracy theorist or trying to promote that type of thinking, but
Yeah.
I think it is a way to have kids be quieter, or to like conform a little bit more.
Yeah.
And
There,
it really
I
is
even,
kind of sad to see sometimes, or when you have a child in front of you. I work part-time in community pharmacy. When you see a 6 or 7 year old who's on four psychotherapy meds, it's
that's,
like it's really sad. And a lot of the cases, I don't know if I should bring this up or not, but a lot of especially the young men who have committed these terrible acts of violence. And I'm not
Um,
saying it's the cause, but all of them were on some kind of med.
they had talked about that there was a major, correlation for like with things that happened in Columbine, like things like that. I mean, they were some of
Yeah,
them I think were
yeah.
on Zoloft, I believe, and I was like, oh gosh, that's
And
what I
the
was
other
on.
thing could be it's not that the medications caused it. I'm not saying that because obviously they were on medication because they were having a lot of mental health
Mhm.
issues. So it
Mhm.
was still definitely a mental health issue. Um, but I wonder what other type of therapies were offered to them.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know, were they
chances.
did they go to counseling? Did they were they encouraged, for meditation? Were they encouraged for journaling? Were they encouraged for some kind of movement like the um, yoga or tai chi or any of those kind of things that have science-based evidence um, that they can definitely help
Yeah.
with root because your brain is wired in a certain way, and as you think thoughts, like they obviously not just the boys who committed those type of things, but even all young kids, all people have
Mhm.
thoughts, and um, you think certain thoughts, and it becomes a belief, and you're even if it's not a good one or
Mhm.
it's is something that could be detrimental to you, but you're firing and wiring these neurosynaptic uh, areas in your brain. So you come up with uh, these clusters of neurons that fire and wire together because you think thoughts, and then you start to believe them. But there are ways without medication to fire and wire or change those. That's neuroplasticity, which is that your brain can change. And
Mhm.
And so I see that as potentially, a really great type of tool to use with especially younger people because they've got their whole life to live. So if we can help them rewire their brain without medications, but naturally to change their thoughts about themselves, about the world, about others, we would be doing such a great service to them.
Absolutely. And I've even heard of certain like school programs that, it's usually like an after school program, but that they've started to, do like had like have like a meditation time, or instead of it just being like instead of kindergarten having playtime always be just like, just like chaos of toys and
Hmm.
sandboxes and things
Hmm.
like that, which is
Hmm.
very necessary and play is very needed. But
Yes.
also to have those moments where they go, it's meditation time. And so they might even bring in like, a singing bowl, a
Yep.
couple things to just like,
Yep.
and the kids get in there and
Yep.
they learn how to, in the moment, the teacher will guide them to being like, okay, notice where you're having a big feeling. And so like, they'll be like, oh man. So like they really are able to anchor into like what it is that they're feeling in the moment and really
Yep.
actually shift it in real time. And that
Yep.
skill is, I mean,
Yep.
it's like we
Yeah.
as adults like are still learning that. I mean, to learn it
Exactly.
if you're 6 years old, I mean,
Would be so beneficial. I mean, I've seen where some schools, instead of detention, they have meditation. And
oh,
meditation, a lot of people think you have to sit there and go, and be like a Buddhist monk. But
yeah.
there's so many types of meditation. It could be just a silent meditation. It could be the movement, like I've talked about. It could be sound bowl, where you have, because everybody's different too, how they learn or what they like. So some people really like the sound of sound bowls. But with heart math, like they have a whole program. They have a lot of resources for children. And, like they have kids, it's almost like gamified. So they have like this whole thing that you could do on the computer, and it's like, where do thoughts come from? And to open up that discussion for kids, because that's something that we don't always discuss either.
Wow. Well, and to have there be like, elements of like learning and play, with it too for
Yeah,
children,
yeah,
where it makes it fun and interactive. And, we want to know like how we operate and like what's happening with us. We want to know ourselves better. So to make it in a way that's really fun for them and really inviting
yeah,
is like,
yeah,
I think it's a beautiful thing that, that like both they'll benefit from just, from being that young and receiving that. But even, I mean, I think that even us as adults, like there can be just such a beautiful curiosity there of like, why is it that I operate the way that I do, but more importantly than the why is just what can I do now to shift things if, the reality that I'm
Right,
living or the health experience that I'm having isn't
right,
what I desire today.
right,
And
right, exactly.
yeah, and I think that we have a lot of
Exactly.
power.
And that's what I was going to say is it's wonderful for children or young adults because then that way they can carry that throughout their life. But if you're an adult currently, you know, there you can still experience that. And I think what happens, and I talked a little bit earlier about it, but what I see also in the healthcare system or sick care system is that so often we try to fix things or we try to address the symptoms and we don't always teach people how to really take responsibility,
Mm,
you know, because
mhm.
if you really take radical responsibility for your health and well-being, you're going to do things differently.
That is so,
And
so
that to
true.
me is part of well care versus sick care, because in sick care, let me take care of you, let me give you the pill, let me uh, do this or do that. What can you do? We'll just keep taking the pills or just keep doing what I say.
It's like it's an outsourcing of personal power in a way, you know.
It
Where
absolutely is. It you subjugate that, you give that away to others when you just truly believe in that system 100%. And
Mhm.
I know a lot of people in my circle don't necessarily because I attract that kind of person. Like you probably do too.
Mhm.
And my goal is to really ignite global wellness. That's a passion of mine. And one of those pillars that I look at is that to help people see that they can and do have a choice in that.
Mhm.
That
Yes.
it doesn't have to be, you don't have to believe that you're sick and that you can't get better because you've been told that.
That is, I think that's an experience that a lot of people have, myself included, where I had been given, several different diagnoses throughout my life that they said, would never change. And this is how you are for the rest of your life, which, at the time, if you take that in and you believe it, I mean, it's devastating, because you say, oh my gosh, like I was once one way and I'll never return to that. But
Yeah.
on a logical level, in some ways, it doesn't really make sense because, I mean, if you've been well, you've gotten sick before and gotten well, what's to say that you couldn't again? And that's where it's like when you really change the environment in your body, and that includes, not just like what you're eating, which is extremely important. Like food chemistry is like a very important thing with what you're taking in, but then also how it is that what's your way of being, what's your way of thinking? Because if you're you could be eating all the salads in the world, but if you are just flying on stress like an adrenaline 24/7, your body's
Mm-hmm.
going to still be struggling, to
Yeah.
keep up with what's being kind of thrown at it. In this
Yeah.
case, just that constant triggered stress response, right?
Absolutely.
And yeah,
That
yeah,
goes back to epigenetics. And people are
yes,
like, Epi, what?
yeah,
So we all know about genes, and we
uh-huh.
all think that so many people, although people are waking up to it, think that genes determine our outcome. I'm a warrior because my mother and grandmother were a warrior.
Yeah,
Um, I worry all the time. I'm obese because my parents were obese. I'm an alcoholic because my parents were an alcoholic. So we believe all these things. There are some diseases that are from genes,
hmm,
but it's a much less percentage than what we think. So what determines health, non-health, some of those things is epigenetics. So epi is before, so it's what turns genes
yeah,
on and off.
yeah,
And what turns genes on and off is the environment in which they live. So the genes are in cells, and there are a couple of major things that affect the environment. So one would be a trauma, which is like a physical, your genes are going to be affected if you get hit by a car,
sure,
if you get run over, you know what I mean? So trauma, the food you eat, and the water,
hmm,
that we drink. And then there's chemicals or toxins, which unfortunately, we're exposed to. But then the biggest, more than any of this, and again, this is scientifically proven, is your thoughts. Your thoughts turn genes on or off. And it's not even your thoughts, but it's your perception of your thoughts. Because you and I could have the same thought, but we could have a different perception of it.
Mm,
So
mhm.
let me give you an example. So you are in more control of your biology, chemistry, and physiology than what you realize.
Yeah.
So let's take, for example, I'm being chased by a mountain lion. My thought is, oh my God, I've got to get away from this. So you go
Yeah.
into the flight or fight,
Yeah.
right? So you're going to fly,
Run.
you're going to
Yeah.
fight, you're going to fight or flight. So
Yeah.
you're going to try to get away from that, right?
Ideal. Yeah.
And what happens is you get this overproduction of cortisol. And this is very, very simple, but I just want it to there's a lot involved, but you have an overproduction of cortisol, which is the main stress hormone,
Mm.
and it goes to your limbs so that you can do that, fight or flight. But it also takes away all the most of the blood flow from the midsection. You get away from that, and all of a sudden, within time, your cortisol level goes down, and you return to homeostasis
Mm.
because we have the fight or flight, or we have the autonomic, the system that just kind of your heartbeat, your bowels work, all these things that you don't even have to think about.
Yeah.
In today's world, our mother-in-law is that tiger chasing us.
Yeah.
Our
Yes.
boss is that tiger chasing us.
Hmm.
The traffic. So we live in this perpetual state, and we're the only mammals that do this. We live in this perpetual state of crises or overproduction of cortisol. And the overproduction of cortisol, to me, is one of the most basic foundational um, circumstances or conditions that leads to chronic disease, heart issues, diabetes, obesity,
Hmm.
all these different cancer. So, in being able to really manage your thoughts goes much more beyond mental health.
Yeah. That can completely
And it
change your
really
life.
affects us physically, which a lot of people don't always stop and think about. But we've not been taught it either, right? And it's probably some newer developments that have come up in the last 15, 20 years, because epigenetics. So, I like to say that every decision in every moment matters, because when you're in that cortisol, adrenal, your fight or flight, you're making decisions that affect, not, as I said, not just your mental health, but your overall health. And I don't know how I got on that tangent, but I did.
Well, I think
But
it's
I
I
think
think it's great.
it
Yeah.
goes back to the medication. So a lot of the medications that we use today, or all of them, mimic or stop something that's natural in your body.
Mm, mm-hmm.
And I think this goes back to the personal responsibility and also the innate ability of the body to heal.
Yeah.
So when you take, say, a proton pump inhibitor, that's like Prilosec or Meprazole, something for your stomach. What that does is it inhibits the proton pumps in your stomach so you don't secrete acid.
Oh,
But
okay.
if you weren't in such fight or flight, you wouldn't be, because that happens when you're like in fight or flight, or you like can't swallow, or or you're upset and your stomach's upset and everything you eat, right? So, so your body can naturally do that. So every drug is a mimic. Think of an opioid. An opioid drug is a medication that binds to a pain receptor.
Mm.
Um, let's take a classic, an SSRI, which is serotonin, uh, SSRI or serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
Mm-hmm.
So serotonin is reuptake, so you get less serotonin in your body, but you want serotonin because that's the happy one. So this those drugs stop it from being so that it's not uptake. That's not the right word. So it's not like recycled and everything. So you have more of it, so you feel better.
Mhm.
But again, if you were to control your thoughts, you wouldn't have so much of that happening.
Exactly. And I
Easier
think that's a
said than done,
for sure.
but I believe that being in that fight or flight is a learned response. It's something that we have practiced very well over the years.
Hmm.
So now it's a matter of relearning a different way of being and a different way of thinking and a different way of that emotional intelligence so that again it's a skill. Everything is skill based. So it's a skill to really control that mind and to control those thoughts.
Hmm. Absolutely. And, and that can be, when, like you said, you mentioned before, when we're in that fight or flight state, all the blood is in our extremities. We're running from the bear, the tiger, the mother-in-law, whatever it may be.
God
Whatever
bless
it may be,
my mother-in-law's
right?
soul.
We shout out to all the mom-in-laws that we love very much, but it just family dynamics can be fun. But but yeah, but it's like you aren't even like thinking as clearly in that moment, right? So it can be harder to grapple and to maybe even notice when you're spinning out. But that's why when you bring in something like a mindfulness practice into your life, or meditation, or something that has you recentering so that you're not in this autopilot of consistently like spinning out, that is what
Yes,
can really help to start to actually
yes,
notice those moments of like, hey, here's a moment where I'm actually feeling really good. I'm feeling really present, calm in my body.
yes,
And then, oh, and now my boss just shot me this email with this new deadline. And now I'm noticing that it feels like the walls are closing in.
yes,
That's the moment. That is the moment. And I think it's really on a moment to moment basis where you find that time where you're like, oh, I'm lit up and like triggered right now.
yes,
And that is the time to really come back in, recenter and regulate. And make that you can make that a practice, like
yes,
to the point where you can really catch it moment to moment to moment. And that's when people, I think, when you do that, not only do you feel just so much more like at peace within yourself, but that's when with the people that I've worked with, I have seen people have major accelerated health changes once they start to really bring in deep levels of awareness like that, because the body responds. It will start to heal the second that you give it what it needs, which is sometimes just an environment that's just not completely bombarded with cortisol from that constant like trauma stress response that's happening all the
absolutely.
time.
So instead of popping a beer or wine
Mhm.
o'clock, like for a lot of
Right?
women, instead of popping something extra to eat, instead of popping a pill, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what we've been trained to do,
Mm-hmm.
is that constant vigilance of how does this feel in my body?
Mm-hmm.
And people often, transformation is difficult because it is work. But
Yeah.
to me, it's hard. But being in that fight or flight is hard. People are just used to it and they're more comfortable.
Yes.
So, again, you could pop a pill and it could make you feel better. But then in the long run, it doesn't because you have to keep taking it or increase the dose, and then it can cause other problems with your body and other areas and things. So, as you said, working with these different mindfulness practices that you and I are both, used to, and I want to open up people's eyes to the possibility of that,
Yeah.
can really help with that decrease on dependence of something outside of yourself. And, just like we've become accustomed to feeling, being addicted to the life that we hate,
Yeah.
you know, it, it,
Yeah.
that takes work, but we can actually train ourselves to think differently. And after a time, it becomes more natural. It's just like anything. Like when I first started being a pharmacist, when I was first out there, I was scared. And I mean, I was like making sure that I did everything right. And,
Mm-hmm.
and over time, I feel so much more confident and I can do some tasks not mindlessly because you always have to be mindful, but that's the thing. I'm mindful. I can be present with it and do it, but do it pretty quick. you know. And that's the same thing with your thoughts, and that's the same thing with how you treat yourself. It can become a way of life so that it's more natural to do that. And when something is outside of it, like you start going down that rabbit hole, like, boy, what a jerk he was. All of a sudden you're like, hey, where did that come from? That's not me.
Right. Right? Yeah, just to discern what is the, what is the voice of you versus what is the voice of other things that you've been taught, from society or just, traditional things. You're like, hey, what actually feels good to me right now? Does it feel good to, to give the guy that made a risky move in traffic the finger? It might for a second, but then
Yeah,
afterwards, does it really feel good?
yeah,
Like that's the power of regulation and just being really, just like anchored in that, just
yeah, yeah,
regulation, coming back to your heart space, just consistently to make the decision. And like you said, to kind of choose your heart. Like it can be challenging to look at something that makes you feel really uncomfortable in the moment and really look at it and sit with it and be with it. But it's also equally uncomfortable to watch your life get unmanageable because of the level of stress that you're taking in, or to be, relying on substance to try to manage things and the chaos
yeah,
that can like there's so much, there's so many different ways that it can go. So it's the more that we can really just come back to center in the moment and consciously make that choice, like
yeah,
really just consistently make that choice. That is when I see people, like, their lives change very
yeah,
quickly
yeah.
once they really commit and, like you said, take that level of personal responsibility. Because it's like, this isn't said to sound scary or anything, but the truth is that, like, no one's coming to save us. Like, we are
Nobody's
we are the
coming to
ones in
save
the
you.
driver's seat. Yeah, you're in the driver's seat of your life, and that is actually the most empowering, cool thing, because you get to be the one that creates
Yeah,
your health experience in so many
yeah,
ways, like where you have so much more power than you think. You get to create
yeah,
that experience. You get to create, you go on you get to just create your reality in that
yeah,
way. And I mean, there are always, certain environmental things that we can't control, but there's so much that we can really do just to create, like you said, epigenetic wise, the most ideal environment for your
yeah.
body to be able to thrive.
And even those things that you can't control, what you can control is your reaction to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
Yeah.
and
There.
that's the most important thing for that is to really, when that type of thing happens, is to just recognize the fact that, I may not be able to control physically what's happening. Like a lot of people are upset about chaos in the world or what's going on
Of
or
course.
this or that or whatever. And my thought is, I don't like a lot of things. I like some things. I don't like other things. And there's nothing I can do. So I'm just going to view it as how can I regulate myself in this world of chaos right now?
I think that it's
It's
really
a beautiful gift to do that.
it is, because there's some, obviously, when we see like different, like, atrocities that are happening in the world, like, we naturally, like, as a human being that feels compassion for other fellow humans, there's a reaction of, like, oh my gosh, like, of
Mhm.
despair, and fear, right?
Yep.
And so what you can, like, the most powerful thing that you can do, unless you are on the front lines fighting that battle, like, truly,
Yep.
is to be able to do what you can in terms of, advocating, donating, like, like, show up,
Right.
do what you
Right.
can. And then, if we're a part of, like, this kind of branches more into, like, collective consciousness, but, we're part of a collective of human beings.
Yeah.
That's why the kind of field that connects us all. And that's why we
Yeah.
we feel things so powerfully, with each other, and
Yeah.
you're part of the collective. So when you really regulate and center yourself, you're actually helping everybody around you, whether you realize it or not, on a subconscious level. You are, because we are all
Absolutely.
connected as human
Yeah.
beings. That
Yes.
helps to promote that sense of peace and safety. Like, do it for yourself and for people everywhere. Really.
I really believe that if you take care of yourself and your health, mental, physical, whatever it is, then you change you change the world.
Yes, 100%. It's like people see the light on in somebody else and they realize, hey, like, I can turn the light on within me too. And that's a
Yeah,
it's a cool
yeah, you
concept.
give
That's
people permission. You
Yes.
actually, as an example, you give people permission, to be able to do that. And I think that's the same way with, as we're talking about health today and, the medical care and sick care, health, this, that. Again, taking that radical responsibility for your own health, seeing what
Mhm.
you can do to change things. I mean, I've seen people go off diabetes medication. I've seen people cure cancers. I've
Yeah.
seen people not, some working with me, some working with other people and everything.
Yeah.
But again, that your body has such an innate ability to heal itself, that it is just, if we could tap into that power, um, that's what I think is almost like the next step in our evolution. And I feel like there is a conscious awakening about that. I think that, again, going back to 2020, that really had people see that, like, you
Mm,
have to be able to take care of yourself, because if you don't, you may or may not get saved. You may, but you may not.
yeah.
And it also helped to, uh, I think, not just physically but even mentally. And because there was such isolation, and because there was such forcing people to kind of stop and slow down, it was a real awakening. I think it has been going on, but I think that kind of accelerated it a little
Yeah.
bit. And again, with health care or sick care, I think we really saw that. I think we really saw that in 2020, because, and the subsequent years since then, because those who were most prone were those who were the most sick, the most obese, the people who, had uh, chronic diseases,
Yeah.
which so many of those go back to cortisol, which go
Yeah.
back to epigenetics, which goes back to your thoughts or your perception of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the importance of self-care, like you said back then, is like going to be emphasized more, more then than ever, because you know, it was interesting because obviously there were a couple different approaches, for how people could, stay safe during that time. Like some people, went more like the holistic, more holistic or kind of more natural route, and then others incorporated, the I have to be careful on Instagram of how I phrase this,
The V's,
but the what that you get, the thing,
the VS's.
the thing, yeah. So
Gotcha.
it's yeah. So when you get that, and so I saw people that did both. I saw people that there were a lot of different. You were given, like, at the time you were kind of given one option, of what was available at that time, which was obviously caused tremendous amounts of cortisol within people.
Yeah.
Arguing, condemning. It was like a very tumultuous time because of what the stakes were, right? Of people's
Yes.
people's
Yes.
lives, So it was an extremely, extremely stress inducing time just because of the social ramifications of everything.
Yeah.
But it's just the different approaches, just I think show it was kind of that wake up call of, like, we get to take, like, just great care of ourselves,
Mhm.
so that if something like this happens, like, we want it to, what is the difference between the person, like you said, who gets absolutely has a devastating experience with that illness, versus somebody who it just feels like a light cold, right? So,
Yeah.
like, what's happening internally, right? And that could be a mixture of a multitude of factors based off of, like, like cortisol levels and things like that, nutrient deficiencies, which I think the 2020 experience, like, brought a lot of illumination
Yep.
towards that too, where, like, the
Yep.
vitamin D levels of people, like,
Yeah.
really, like, you might just because you feel fine doesn't necessarily mean that your health is in an optimal place, because
Yes.
your body will be really amazing and will support you, and you will feel great until the moment that you don't. And then when that moment happens, that's when it's like, wait, what's
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah.
So that's where then we get to, I think that's part of the personal responsibility component too, can be, being the one that is you know, staying up to date with where your lab levels are for
Yep.
certain
Yep.
nutrient levels, certain
Yep.
things,
Yep.
just and really staying on top of that, because it's
Yep.
like, it's that's just part of it. That's something, once again, that isn't always taught in the doctor's office, but it's something that I think is really important, because otherwise, if we don't if you're unaware, it's like, you don't know unless you know. And so it's like doing, so that's why even just getting the annual physical once a year is a great way to just check in, get the blood work done, in like it's an investment to do the more detailed labs, but it's something that's
Mhm.
really worth it because it's like that is the key to just kind of like, it's your little check-in, like how are things, like where am I in an optimal place right now, and what can I continue to do just to nourish this vessel that is carrying my spirit through life. We get this one body, right? We get, one shot with this body, really. So it's like, what can I do to support it so that it is feeling, not only it has what it needs on a nutrient level, but then also just giving it what it needs in here and in here too. Yeah.
Absolutely. I could not agree more with everything you said. And I have a saying that better questions always leads to better answers.
Mhm.
So on two levels in this conversation, the first is with the different options that we had back then, I feel like there weren't enough questions asked, or if it was,
Mhm.
we both know it was very tumultuous. And unfortunately, now the questions are being asked and we're not liking a lot of the answers that we're getting.
Yeah.
But, there's not much I can do about that, and that's part of my self-regulation because even as somebody who works in the industry and, you know, that's just part of my field, right? So, but I'm glad that questions are being asked because that's the only way to get good answers is to ask questions. So that is about, and I think questions are being asked about that whole industry, which I think is a really great thing.
Mhm.
Again, I am not anti, I am not pro, I am pretty more neutral about that.
Mhm.
But I feel like there's a lot of things that have come up that have not been discussed, and I'm glad that they are. So I'm just glad that questions are being asked, things are being looked at, and we'll see where that goes. On the other front, as far as personal responsibility, again, asking better questions to get better answers. Do you know what your nutrient levels
Mhm.
are? Or do you go to the doctor and once a year and you get labs and you don't even understand or you don't take time to know where you fit in and all of that? That to me is that personal responsibility. And
Mhm.
it's that being able to really take control of your health and knowing what you need to do to be optimally healthy. And so asking those questions of yourself or of a healthcare provider or somebody else like a healthcare provider or functional medicine provider, whatever it is. But I think it first starts with you. How do I feel? Like, how do I really feel? And what do I feel like maybe I need to look at? What have I seen that, maybe some things are off, like the vitamin D levels, that a lot of people talked about during 2020, 2021 and all of that. And even now, like I take a vitamin D supplement
Yeah.
ever since then. And have also worked on losing my weight because I know that that's a big risk factor and I shouldn't be overweight anyway. That's something that I battled. I am a breast cancer victor now, and I am uh, I'm alcohol free over 5 years, which is a big thing.
Amazing.
And so now it's that last front,
Mhm. Yeah.
my weight and my body and everything. But again, it's important, if any message that you can take out of this is that you do have the power to have what you want, no matter what that is. In relationship to your body and to your health and all of that, it's never too late.
Mhm.
And because because you have a thought, or because you hear something, or you're told something by an expert, including myself,
Mhm.
do your own research.
Mm. Mhm.
Don't take my word for it. Don't take the doctor's word for it. Yeah, sometimes you have to because, they want to do surgery and you have a appendicitis, obviously.
Yeah.
But if it's about, well, let's just throw you on this medicine because you have some heart disease, you should have this. Well, no, do I really? So again, it's about how can you be your own best advocate?
Mhm. It's It's that, and I love that of just like of really just taking everything with like a real sense of curiosity before you just kind of I would say kind of just like immediately like blindly commit to something,
or
right?
accept it as
And
fact.
that too, and I think a big thing too to check in with is like just obviously to do some investigating on your own, just and also ask your body too. There's a question, there's a strong component here, and this is in the work that I do with my clients is really about asking yourself, what do you need right now?
Mhm,
And really creating that relationship with your intuition, with your intuitive self, being
mhm,
able to like sit there and I guide people through a process where it's like you put your hand on your heart, really just think of that kind of fire within your heart and ask your question, and you will get an answer within 3 seconds. Anything beyond that is the mind or the ego.
mhm,
It'd be interesting to say, what is it that I need or what's going on here? And you
mhm.
will get an intuitive nudge in a direction that may or may not make any logical sense. But I have
Yep.
often found that if you follow that, you will get the answer. Like you will get the answer. And it's almost immediately given, but it just depends on how willing are we to listen in that moment? How open are we to receive that information? And if you can be open and be like, please show me the way, what's going on, lean into that heart medicine, right? And then just be like, what's happening here? You will start to get the nudge and you will start to get guided as to where to look. And so that really, you bring in that heart and kind of really like really kind of spirit component, whether you call that God, universe, source, whatever it may be. There's and or whether you just think of it's just your own innate intelligence, there's a presence within you that helps to guide. And so just to be able to connect to that as
Absolutely.
well.
And I'm glad you brought up the heart because, as I said earlier, I'm a heart math certified. So not only am I a pharmacist, I'm a heart math certified practitioner. I'm an EFT provider. I'm a Psyche facilitator. So I've got all these different certifications, certified life coach. But what I love is heart math. And there's so many different studies, again, about tuning into the heart and how and getting your heart in a coherent state that can change your biology, physiology, and chemistry. It's just amazing. But your heart will always tell you. It always starts and ends with the heart. And if you can get your heart in a coherent state, which is some of the things that we've talked about today, the heart sends more information to the brain than the brain to the heart.
Mm.
And when you have a fetus developing, and what's interesting, so it has connections to the heart through the heart to the brain through the vagus nerve, but there also are some direct connections between the heart and the some of the other areas in the brain that are responsible for um, executive decision making, executive function, and those type of things. So it's really interesting, some of the resources out there. So that's why if you're like in a state of confusion, it's usually that you're in a fight or flight because it's blocking those pathways to the brain. The other
Interesting.
thing that's interesting to me is that when a fetus starts developing, the first organ that develops is the heart, and it directs every other organ area or system on when to develop. So the heart is really at the center. The heart, it always begins and ends with the heart. And if you listen to your heart, which again is a skill, it
Mm-hmm.
takes practice because it's not going to be like Alexa or Siri and say, "This is the answer."
Chat GPT. Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to be, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But if you develop that skill and live by that, you will have a different life.
Absolutely. Oh, that right there, I mean, that's it right there. That's the medicine. That is the powerful message. Like, I mean, everything really at the end of the day, it comes back to the heart.
Yeah.
It's what's gonna fuel like how you think, how you be, how your genes respond, how your cells express themselves, how the rate that we regenerate or degenerate. Like it's that's where I think like you talk about the root's right here. I think that's really where the root is. Yeah.
And if I can,
Mhm.
I'm going to I know we don't want to go too much longer,
Okay.
although this has been a wonderful conversation,
Yeah.
but if I can just give everybody a very simple breathing
Yeah.
technique.
Please.
to be heart centered. And you could do it anytime. Heart math has shown that if you can do this for 15 minutes a day consistently, that you will increase your emotional intelligence, your emotional IQ, get into more regulation. But even if you do it for a minute, and as during a stressful time or whatever. So it's always about going, breathing in and out. So I'm just going to walk people through it. It'll take me just
Beautiful.
a minute or two. So
Amazing.
what I do is I invite people to sit back and relax.
Mm.
Close your eyes if you want to, leave them open if you want to. I like to put my left hand on my heart just to remind me of where I'm going. And you start to breathe in and out through your nose at a slower than normal pace. So we recommend 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. It's a very natural breath. It does not have to be a full inhalation, full exhalation. It's not one of those other kind of breathing techniques that's very forceful. This is a very natural rhythmic breath. So in five, out five.
Mhm.
And as you're doing that, you're going to envision the breath going through your heart area. So you're not going to visualize it, like I'm not asking you to visualize it going in and out, but I'm asking you to feel it. Just feel that breath going in and out through the heart area. In five or whatever's comfortable for you, out five. And I have practiced this so much, like my heart, I can feel a difference when I start doing that.
Mhm.
And just continue to do that. I know, again, we're out of time, but just try to practice that. Like, see how that works for you. That's a very simple, easy way to start regulating your heart to be in a more coherent state. And I can tell you, if you do that, as I said, 15 minutes a day, um, even if it's five, and five, it will change your life. And you do that for a month. So do a May challenge, do it for the rest of the month. And I can tell you that it will, life will be different. Or in those times where, use it like even for a minute, or even a half a minute, when you're like really dysregulated, an easy way to come back to your body is your breath, because your breath is life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just that, but in and out through the heart.
Beautiful. That's amazing. Even when I was just doing that with you just now, I was like, I mean, I was feeling pretty good when I jumped on here, but even that, I was like, oh, I feel things like slowing down,
Mhm.
even getting even more clear, just like yeah, that's beautiful to take that pause. And I think that especially if we think, oh, I don't have time to meditate, then but you have time to breathe. You have time to breathe. We all have time to breathe.
Yep,
So to
yep,
just to
yep.
take that moment to
I,
really breathe.
I like
Yeah.
to say practice the pause.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that'll change the whole trajectory of your day. It's like if you're spinning out, that is the time to go, wait, I'm spinning out. Now is the time to really bring it back to center so that the rest of my day is
Yep,
more
yep,
placid instead of up and down, up and
yep,
down. So
yep.
what a beautiful, beautiful exercise to walk us through, Angela. Thank you so much for being here with me today for this just extremely powerful conversation. I know I laugh. We had planned on this being 30 minutes and we were like, no, we got way too much to share. We're like,
We do.
so thank you. Thank you just so much for being here and just sharing your wisdom and your just incredible lived experience of sharing the work, being the example, and just thank you. I can't thank you enough for being here today.
I so appreciate you and the opportunity and the platform to speak. I'm so passionate about this. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all those who are watching or will watch.
Yeah.
Uh, so thank you.
Of course. So for Angela, I'm going to put all of your information here below once I post this video. This is Angela, or you can find her on Facebook, and then from Midlife to Dream Life here on Instagram as well. So I'm going to put that information in the comments so you can stay in touch with her, stay in touch with me. Feel free
Perfect.
to share with us how this experience and this conversation was for you today, and just different questions or feedback, because we love to hear from you guys. So
Yeah.
Thank you again,
Absolutely.
Angela,
Thank you.
so very much. And then we'll definitely be back. But this was a great, amazing
Yes.
conversation today. So
Yeah.
everybody have a wonderful, healthy, happy day. Just remember to keep just in any moment, keep coming back to the heart, and that's a great rule to live by.
Yeah.
So, all right,
All right.
all
Thank
right.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you, love. All right, bye, everybody.